Sometimes the loneliest women carry the most powerful secrets. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor exactly 3 seconds before Evelyn Carter collapsed. Crystals scattered beneath designer heels while a string quartet stopped playing mid-note inside the grand ballroom of the Blackwood Winter Gala. 100 of the wealthiest people in Manhattan turned at once. Cameras flashed. Someone screamed. Evelyn barely heard any of it. Her vision blurred beneath the gold chandeliers as pain twisted through her stomach hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. She reached instinctively for the curve beneath her silver dress, her trembling hand protecting the life she had hidden from the world for 7 months. Then came the voice that changed everything. "Call a doctor now!" The crowd parted instantly as Damian Blackwood moved toward her like a storm in a tailored black tuxedo. At 34, the Billionaire CEO carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms without effort. Cold blue eyes. Sharp jawline. Old money confidence. Men feared him. Women chased him. But at that moment, none of the guests recognized the expression on his face. Fear. Real fear. Evelyn tried to stand, but her knees gave out again. Damian caught her before she hit the floor completely, his hands sliding behind her back carefully, as if she might break. The warmth of him shocked her more than the pain. She had spent months imagining what would happen if she ever saw him again. Anger. Shame. Regret. Not this. Never this. "Evelyn," he said quietly, staring at her pale face. "What happened?" She opened her mouth to answer, but another sharp cramp stole her breath. Around them, whispers exploded through the ballroom like wildfire. Why was Damian Blackwood holding a pregnant woman nobody recognized? Why did he look like the world was ending? Then the emergency physician pushed through the crowd and dropped beside them with a medical bag in hand. "Ma'am, I need you to stay calm for me." Evelyn nodded weakly while the doctor checked her pulse. The room felt too bright. Too loud. Somewhere in the distance, reporters were already recording. Socialites leaned closer pretending not to stare. Evelyn knew this world. Rich people could smell scandal faster than blood. "How far along are you?" the doctor asked. Evelyn hesitated. Damian noticed immediately. His eyes narrowed. 7 months, she whispered. The doctor pressed a monitor gently against her stomach. Static crackled through the speaker first. Then came the heartbeat. Fast. Strong. Another heartbeat followed. Then another. The doctor froze. The ballroom went silent all over again. "Oh my God!" she breathed. Damian's voice turned dangerously calm. "What is it?" The doctor slowly looked up at him. "She's carrying triplets." Someone dropped a champagne tray behind them. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Evelyn closed her eyes because she already knew what came next. Questions. Headlines. Exposure. The secret she had protected for months was gone. Damian stared at the monitor like he could not process the words. Triplets. His triplets. Before he could speak, another voice sliced through the silence. "Damian!" Victoria Hale said sharply from the staircase above them, her diamond engagement ring sparkling beneath the lights. "Why are you touching her?" Evelyn looked up just in time to see the expression on Victoria's face change from irritation to absolute horror as her eyes locked onto Evelyn's stomach. The silence inside the ballroom felt heavier than the snowstorm raging beyond the glass windows of Blackwood Tower. Evelyn Carter could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her at once, but the only gaze that unsettled her was Damian Blackwood's. He still had one arm around her shoulders, steady and protective, even though the entire room had just discovered the secret she spent 7 months trying to hide. Triplets. The words seemed to echo endlessly beneath the crystal chandeliers. Victoria Hale descended the marble staircase slowly, one manicured hand gripping the silver railing so tightly her knuckles turned pale. The famous Manhattan socialite had spent the last year appearing beside Damian on magazine covers and charity galas, smiling like the future queen of the Blackwood Empire. But now her perfect expression was cracking apart in real time. "Damian," she repeated carefully, her voice thinner now. "Tell me this is not what it looks like." Damien did not answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on Evelyn's face as another wave of discomfort crossed her expression. The physician beside them spoke first. She needs to get to a hospital tonight. Her blood pressure is elevated, and stress is not good for the babies. Babies. Not one child. 3. The guests erupted into whispers again. Phones appeared everywhere. Wealthy people loved secrets until they became public. Then they became entertainment. Evelyn tried pulling away gently, humiliated by the attention flooding the ballroom. I am fine, she whispered. I can leave on my own. Damien's grip tightened slightly. You are not leaving alone. The authority in his voice silenced even the nearest reporters. Across the room, 2 more men appeared near the ballroom entrance, almost simultaneously. Alexander Blackwood entered first, silver-haired and commanding despite being in his 60s, his dark overcoat still dusted with snowflakes from outside. Beside him walked Lucas Blackwood, the youngest Blackwood brother, and one of the top neonatal surgeons in New York Presbyterian Hospital. Both men stopped cold when they saw Evelyn. More specifically, when they saw her stomach. Lucas looked between Damien and the medical monitor still resting beside Evelyn. Please tell me I heard wrong, he muttered quietly. The physician shook her head once. Triplets. Alexander Blackwood exhaled slowly, the kind of measured breath powerful men took before billion-dollar decisions. But this was not business. This was legacy. 3 heirs. 3 Blackwood children the world did not know existed until 30 seconds ago. Victoria noticed the shift instantly. The atmosphere around the room had changed. The scandal was no longer about some mysterious pregnant woman appearing at a gala. It was about the Blackwood bloodline. Evelyn saw it too, and fear curled in her chest harder than before. Wealthy families protected their own. But they also controlled everything they touched. She had spent months hiding because she did not want her children raised inside a world built from contracts, headlines, and power games. I should go, she said softly again. This time Alexander Blackwood stepped closer before Damien could respond. His deep voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to commanding entire boardrooms with a single sentence. Miss Carter, he said carefully, you are carrying my grandchildren during a snowstorm while standing in a ballroom full of reporters. You are not going anywhere except somewhere safe. Evelyn stared at him in shock. She expected denial. Anger. Lawyers. Not this. Never this. Victoria laughed suddenly, sharp and nervous. This is insane, she snapped. We do not even know if those babies are Damien's. The room stiffened. Damien finally looked away from Evelyn. Slowly. Coldly. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees beneath his stare alone. Enough, Victoria. She blinked at him, stunned by the warning in his tone. You cannot possibly be serious right now, she whispered. You are choosing her over me? Damien glanced back toward Evelyn instinctively, and that single movement answered the question before he even spoke. Victoria saw it too. Everyone did. The physician began packing up her equipment carefully. She really should not remain under this much stress, she warned quietly. Lucas immediately stepped forward. My car is downstairs. I already called ahead to Presbyterian. They are preparing a private maternity suite. Evelyn's heart pounded harder. This was happening too fast. 7 months of secrecy were collapsing in minutes beneath the weight of billionaire attention. She thought about the tiny apartment she rented near the harbor. The second-hand crib she spent weeks assembling alone. The overdue utility bills folded inside her kitchen drawer. None of it belonged in this room filled with old money and diamond chandeliers. Damien looked down at her again, softer this time. Why did you disappear? He asked quietly enough that only she could hear. Evelyn swallowed hard. Because she remembered the last night she saw him 7 months ago. The rain. The penthouse suite overlooking Manhattan. The way he held her like she mattered for exactly one night before the world pulled him away again by morning. And because She never believed a man like Damian Blackwood would choose someone like her when the sun came up. Snow hammered against the windows of the black SUV as it sped through Manhattan traffic, red brake lights reflecting across the wet streets like rivers of fire. Evelyn Carter sat quietly in the back seat, wrapped in a cashmere blanket someone had placed around her shoulders without asking. Across from her, Lucas Blackwood monitored her blood pressure while speaking calmly into his phone with the hospital staff. Everything around her moved with terrifying efficiency. Doors opened before they arrived. Elevators were cleared. Entire hallways seemed to empty the moment the Blackwood name was mentioned. Evelyn had spent most of her life unnoticed. Invisible. The daughter of a mechanic from Connecticut who learned early that the world only protected wealthy people. But tonight, for the first time in months, she was surrounded by people acting as if her safety mattered more than anything else. And somehow that frightened her even more. Damian sat beside her in silence, one hand braced against the leather seat as the SUV turned sharply through icy streets. He had removed his tuxedo jacket earlier and draped it over Evelyn's knees when he noticed her shivering. Small gesture. Quiet. Dangerous. Because kindness from men like Damian Blackwood always came with consequences. "You should try to breathe slower," Lucas said gently while adjusting the monitor cuff around her arm. "Stress can trigger contractions this late in a triplet pregnancy." Evelyn nodded softly, embarrassed by how carefully everyone watched her now. She had survived 7 months alone. 7 months of hiding oversized sweaters beneath waitressing aprons. 7 months of morning sickness in the tiny restroom behind Harbor Street Diner while customers complained about cold coffee outside. 7 months of pretending everything was normal while 3 babies grew inside her body and nobody knew. Nobody except her landlord, Mrs. Green, who once slipped an extra loaf of bread outside her apartment door after noticing Evelyn skip dinner 3 nights in a row. Evelyn looked out the tinted window. Snow covered the sidewalks in thick white layers now. Somewhere downtown, people were still dancing beneath chandeliers while gossip exploded across social media. She could already imagine the headlines. Mystery pregnant woman at Blackwood Gala. Billionaire heir scandal. Hidden triplets. Her stomach twisted harder than before. Damian noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Reporters are going to find out where I live." The vehicle fell silent. Lucas lowered his tablet slowly. Even the driver glanced briefly into the rearview mirror. Damian's expression darkened almost instantly. "No," he said firmly. "They will not." Evelyn almost laughed at the certainty in his voice. Men like Damian believed money could control everything. Sometimes they were right. But not always. "You do not understand," she whispered. "My apartment building does not even have secure locks downstairs. If reporters show up there..." Her voice faded. She thought about the tiny nursery she painted herself in pale cream colors. 3 second-hand cribs squeezed side by side beneath paper stars taped carefully to the ceiling. It was not much. But it was hers. Damian studied her quietly for several seconds before speaking again. "You are not going back there tonight." Evelyn stiffened immediately. "I am not staying at your penthouse." Lucas suddenly looked very interested in his medical equipment. Damian remained calm. "You nearly collapsed in a ballroom carrying triplets during a snowstorm. And I survived before your family found me." The words slipped out sharper than she intended. Silence filled the SUV again. Damian looked away first, jaw tightening slightly as city lights flashed across his face. For one painful second Evelyn regretted saying it. Because despite everything, he had not raised his voice once tonight. He had not denied the babies. Had not accused her of trapping him. Had not demanded lawyers or DNA tests like she feared for months. Instead, he looked terrified every time she winced in pain. The SUV finally pulled beneath the covered entrance of New York Presbyterian Hospital, where security guards already waited outside holding umbrellas against the snow. The moment Evelyn stepped out, camera flashes exploded across the street. Reporters. Dozens of them. Somehow they had arrived before her. Questions slammed through the air instantly. Miss Carter, are the babies Damien Blackwood's? How long have you been hiding the pregnancy? Is this why the engagement is over? Evelyn froze beneath the lights, panic crashing into her chest so suddenly she could barely breathe. Then something unexpected happened. 4 men stepped around her at once. Damien on her left. Lucas beside her. Alexander Blackwood behind her shoulder. And another man she did not recognize moving calmly in front of her wearing a charcoal wool coat and wire-framed glasses. Ethan Blackwood, the family attorney. The 4 billionaire men formed a wall around her without speaking. Protective. Controlled. Untouchable. Ethan glanced briefly toward the reporters before speaking in a calm voice that somehow silenced the entire entrance. Any photographs of Miss Carter taken tonight without consent will be litigated aggressively by morning. The reporters hesitated instantly. Wealthy men did not make threats. They made promises. Evelyn stared at them in stunned silence as hospital staff rushed her inside away from the snow and flashing lights. For the first time in 7 months, nobody was treating her like a burden. They were treating her like someone precious. And that terrified her more than being alone ever had. The private maternity suite on the 23rd floor looked less like a hospital room and more like something designed for royalty. Soft lighting glowed against cream-colored walls. Fresh white orchids sat near the windows overlooking snowy Manhattan. A fireplace flickered quietly beneath a mounted television larger than anything Evelyn Carter had ever owned in her life. Even the blankets felt impossibly expensive against her skin. And somehow that only made her feel more out of place. Evelyn sat carefully on the edge of the hospital bed while nurses moved around the room checking monitors and adjusting equipment. Every few seconds the steady rhythm of 3 tiny heartbeats echoed softly through the speakers beside her. Strong. Fast. Alive. The sound calmed her more than anything else tonight. Blood pressure is stabilizing, one nurse said with a relieved smile before leaving the room quietly. The moment the door shut behind her, silence settled again. Evelyn looked down at her hands resting protectively over her stomach. She had imagined this moment so many times during sleepless nights in her apartment. Imagined lawyers arriving. DNA demands. Public humiliation. But instead she was sitting inside the most expensive hospital suite in New York, while billionaire men guarded the hallway outside like private soldiers. None of it made sense. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts before the door opened slowly. Damien stepped inside alone. He had loosened his tie hours ago, and exhaustion shadowed his face now beneath the warm hospital lighting. Yet somehow he still looked terrifyingly composed. Like a man trained his entire life never to lose control in front of other people. He closed the door behind him quietly. Lucas said you finally agreed to eat something. Evelyn glanced toward the untouched bowl of soup beside the bed. I am working on it. Damien nodded once before walking toward the windows overlooking the city. Snow continued falling heavily beyond the glass, covering Manhattan in white silence. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Damien finally turned toward her. 7 months, he said quietly. You disappeared for 7 months. Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. She knew this conversation was coming the second he saw the babies tonight. I did not disappear, she whispered. I left. Damien studied her carefully. Without telling me. A painful laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Would it have mattered? The question landed harder than she intended. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. Evelyn looked away before she could regret saying it again. She remembered that night too clearly now. The rain against penthouse windows. The city lights reflecting across Damien's face while he spoke about pressure, responsibility, and never trusting anyone completely. He looked lonely that night. Human. Not like the billionaire the world feared. And for one reckless evening, Evelyn forgot who he was. You vanished the next morning, she said softly. There were reporters outside your building before sunrise. Your assistant escorted me out through the service elevator like some embarrassing mistake. Damien frowned immediately. What? Evelyn blinked in surprise at the genuine confusion in his expression. Your assistant said you had an emergency board meeting in Zurich. She told me not to expect a callback. Damien went very still. Slowly, pieces of something darker settled behind his eyes. Claire told you that? Evelyn nodded once. Silence filled the room again, but this silence felt different now. Colder. More dangerous. Damien walked toward the bed slowly, his voice quieter than before. Evelyn, I never told anyone to send you away. Her heart skipped painfully. What? I spent 3 weeks trying to find you after I came back from Switzerland. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. Damien exhaled slowly, one hand rubbing across his jaw like the memory still frustrated him months later. Your phone was disconnected. Your apartment lease ended. Nobody at the diner knew where you went. Evelyn's throat tightened instantly. Because that part was true. She had left Manhattan on purpose after discovering the pregnancy. Fear made people do irrational things. Especially women carrying children they could barely afford to feed. I thought, she whispered before stopping herself. Damien stepped closer. You thought I would want you gone. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Evelyn's eyes now, humiliating and sudden. Men like you do not usually want complicated women carrying triplets. Damien stared at her for several seconds without speaking. Then, unexpectedly, something in his expression softened completely. Men like me? He repeated quietly. Evelyn looked down immediately, embarrassed. Damien moved closer until he stood beside the hospital bed. Evelyn. His voice dropped lower now. Gentler. Do you honestly believe I looked at you tonight and saw a problem? She could not answer because the truth terrified her too much. Instead, she looked toward the monitor beside the bed where 3 tiny heartbeats continued flickering steadily through the quiet room. Damien followed her gaze instinctively. The hard expression disappeared from his face again almost instantly. For the first time all night, Evelyn saw something raw beneath the billionaire composure. Wonder. Fear. Hope. Then the silence shattered. The hospital room door burst open without warning as Ethan Blackwood stepped inside holding his phone, his usually calm expression suddenly grim. We have a problem, he said sharply. Damien turned immediately. What happened? Ethan looked directly at Evelyn before answering. Someone leaked her apartment address online. Reporters are already outside the building, and social media is calling her a gold digger carrying Blackwood heirs for money. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. But what Ethan said next terrified the room even more. And Victoria Hale just posted that the babies might not belong to Damien at all. Evelyn Carter felt the room tilt again, but this time it was not because of the pregnancy. It was humiliation. Cold and sharp and immediate. Ethan Blackwood handed his phone silently to Damien, and within seconds the atmosphere inside the hospital suite changed completely. Damien's face hardened as he read the screen. Victoria Hale's social media post was already spreading across every gossip account in Manhattan. A black and white photo from the gala filled the display beside the caption. Funny how some women suddenly appear pregnant with billionaire heirs when there's money involved. Are we sure those babies even belong to Damien? More than 80,000 comments had appeared in less than 20 minutes. Gold digger. Attention seeker. Trapped him on purpose. Evelyn's chest tightened painfully. She had spent her entire pregnancy trying to avoid exactly this moment. The judgment. The whispers. The internet turning her into entertainment for strangers sitting safely behind screens. Damien slowly lowered the phone. Take it down, he said quietly. Ethan nodded once. My legal team is already filing emergency injunctions. I do not care about the injunctions. Damien's voice dropped lower. Colder. I said take it down. Ethan immediately stepped into a hallway making calls before the sentence even finished. Evelyn stared at the blanket across her lap, unable to look at anyone. I should not have come tonight, she whispered. The words barely reached the room. Damien looked at her instantly. Do not say that. It is true. She swallowed hard against the pressure building in her throat. Everything was calm before tonight. Nobody knew about the babies. Nobody was following me. Damien stepped closer to the bed again, frustration flickering briefly across his expression. You think this is your fault? Evelyn finally looked up at him. Your fiancé just accused me of using your children for money in front of the entire country. Damien's jaw tightened at the word fiancé. Before he could answer, the door opened again and Alexander Blackwood entered carrying something unexpected. A paper shopping bag from Harbor Street Diner. Evelyn blinked in confusion immediately. Alexander walked toward the bedside carefully and set the bag beside her untouched hospital soup. Chicken noodle soup, he said simply. Extra crackers. The waitress downstairs said it is the only thing you eat when you are stressed. Evelyn stared at him speechless. Alexander Blackwood was one of the richest men in America. Forbes called him the king of East Coast real estate. Senators attended his charity dinners. CEOs feared disappointing him. And somehow this man had personally gone downstairs in the middle of a media scandal to buy her comfort food from a diner. You went there? She whispered. Alexander removed his gloves slowly. The young woman at the counter nearly fainted when she realized who I was. For the first time all night, something dangerously close to a smile touched Evelyn's face. Small. Fragile. But real. Damien noticed immediately. So did Alexander. The older billionaire softened almost instantly at the sight. Eat, Alexander ordered gently. 3 babies are a full-time job. Evelyn hesitated before carefully opening the container. Warm steam rose into the quiet hospital room, carrying the familiar smell of carrots, noodles, and broth. Home. Safety. Suddenly tears burned behind her eyes again so fast it startled her. She remembered eating this same soup. Alone at the diner after double shifts while rubbing her stomach and pretending everything would somehow work out. Now 4 billionaire men were reorganizing hospital security because strangers online insulted her. None of it felt real. Lucas walked back into the room holding a tablet. I adjusted visitor access to this floor, he said calmly. Only approved staff can enter now. Good, Damien answered immediately. Lucas glanced toward Evelyn's monitor and smiled slightly after checking the baby's heartbeats. All 3 still sound strong. Evelyn rested one hand over her stomach instinctively. 3 tiny movements pressed gently against her palm, almost as if the babies recognized the sound of familiar voices around them. Damien noticed again. He noticed everything. Do they kick often? He asked quietly. Evelyn looked surprised by the question. Mostly at night. Which one moves the most? She blinked at him for several seconds before answering softly. The one closest to my left side. Damien crouched beside the hospital bed slowly, careful not to startle her. Can I? Evelyn hesitated only a second before nodding. Damien placed his hand carefully against the side of her stomach. The room fell completely silent. Then suddenly one tiny kick pressed firmly against his palm. Damien froze. Completely. Evelyn watched the exact second something shifted inside him. The billionaire composure disappeared. The cold walls vanished. He looked stunned. Human. Almost overwhelmed. Another small kick followed immediately after. Damien laughed once under his breath, quiet and disbelieving. That is impossible, he whispered. Lucas smirked from across the room. Welcome to fatherhood. But before anyone could speak again, Ethan returned sharply through the doorway holding his phone with a grim expression. We traced the leak, he announced. Damien stood immediately. Who did it? Ethan looked directly toward him. Claire Morgan. Silence crashed through the room. Evelyn felt her stomach drop instantly. Claire. Damien's assistant. The same woman who told her 7 months ago that Damien never wanted to see her again. Ethan's voice lowered carefully. And based on financial transfers we found tonight, Victoria paid her. The hospital room fell into a dangerous kind of silence after Ethan Blackwood spoke Victoria's name. Snow continued drifting outside the tall windows, soft and quiet against Manhattan's skyline, but inside the suite the atmosphere shifted completely. Damien looked like someone trying very hard not to lose control. Evelyn noticed it immediately in the way his shoulders stiffened and the way his jaw locked so tightly a muscle flickered beneath his skin. "How long?" Damien asked finally. Ethan glanced at the documents on his phone. "At least 7 months." Evelyn felt her heartbeat stumble. 7 months. The exact amount of time she had been carrying the babies. Lucas cursed softly under his breath while Alexander Blackwood lowered himself slowly into the chair beside the fireplace, his expression colder than Evelyn had seen all night. Claire handled Damien's private schedule. Ethan continued carefully. She intercepted messages, deleted call logs, and monitored outgoing communication after the Zurich merger. Damien looked toward Evelyn immediately. Understanding crashed across his face all at once. "She made sure I could not find you." Evelyn swallowed hard without answering because now everything made terrible sense. The unanswered calls. The disconnected emails. The strange silence after that one night that changed her entire life. She remembered sitting in a tiny laundromat 2 weeks after discovering the pregnancy, staring at her phone for hours hoping Damien might somehow call anyway. He never did. Or at least she thought he never did. Why would Victoria do this? Evelyn whispered quietly. Ethan gave a humorless smile. Because billion-dollar families are not built on romance. They are built on inheritance. Alexander spoke for the first time in several minutes, his deep voice calm and sharp. Victoria spent 2 years preparing to become Mrs. Blackwood. He looked toward Evelyn carefully. Then tonight she discovered there are already 3 heirs standing between her and that future. Evelyn instinctively rested both hands over her stomach again. Heirs. The word sounded so cold compared to babies. Compared to the tiny kicks she felt at night, while folding second-hand baby clothes alone inside her apartment. Damien suddenly turned toward Ethan. "I want Claire removed from every Blackwood account tonight." "Already done." "And Victoria?" Ethan hesitated briefly. "She is still speaking to the press." That finally broke something inside Damien's composure. He stood abruptly and walked toward the windows, one hand braced against the glass while Manhattan glowed beneath the snow below him. Evelyn watched him quietly. Powerful men rarely showed emotion openly. But she could feel the anger radiating through the room anyway. Not because of headlines. Not because of scandal. Because someone manipulated both of them for months. Lucas moved toward the bed and adjusted Evelyn's monitor gently. "Stress levels are climbing again," he warned softly. "All of you need to stop talking like this in front of her." Alexander immediately stood. "He is right." Then unexpectedly, the billionaire patriarch walked toward Evelyn and carefully placed a folded piece of paper beside her soup bowl. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "An address." Evelyn looked down in confusion. "Upper East Side. Private residence. It belongs to the family," Alexander explained. "No reporters know about it. Security is already stationed outside." Evelyn looked up immediately. "You are moving me?" "Temporarily," Lucas answered before anyone else could. "Triplet pregnancies this late are unpredictable. You should not be alone right now." Evelyn's throat tightened instantly. Alone. She had become so used to surviving by herself that the idea of people taking care of her felt almost painful. "I cannot accept that," she whispered. "You already have," Damien said quietly from across the room. She looked toward him. He had turned away from the windows now, exhaustion shadowing his face beneath the dim hospital lights. "Evelyn," he continued softly, "someone leaked your address to the entire country tonight. I am not letting you go back there." The certainty in his voice unsettled her because part of her wanted to trust it. And trusting powerful men was exactly how women got hurt. "I do not need charity," she said. Carefully. Damien crossed the room slowly until he stood beside the hospital bed again. "Good," he answered. "Because this is not charity." Their eyes locked for several seconds. Evelyn could not breathe properly under the intensity of his stare. Then suddenly the babies moved all at once beneath her hands. Sharp little kicks. Lucas smiled immediately while checking the monitor. Well, he murmured. Apparently somebody in there has opinions. For the first time all night, a quiet laugh escaped the room. Even Damien smiled slightly before lowering himself carefully into the chair beside Evelyn's bed. Do they always react like that? He asked softly. Evelyn nodded once. Usually when I am emotional. Damien looked down toward her stomach thoughtfully. Then, very carefully, he rested his hand against the blanket again. Another tiny movement answered him almost instantly. His entire expression changed. Wonder softened every hard edge in his face while the steady rhythm of 3 heartbeats filled the quiet room between them. Evelyn watched him silently, something fragile shifting inside her chest too. Because no billionaire performance looked like this. No media strategy sounded like the way Damien whispered, almost to himself. I cannot believe they are real. But before the moment could settle, Ethan's phone rang sharply again. He answered immediately, listened for 3 seconds, then looked up with visible concern. Damien, he said carefully. Victoria just announced a live interview for midnight. Silence returned instantly. Ethan swallowed once before continuing. And she claims she has proof Evelyn planned this pregnancy from the beginning. Midnight arrived with snow still falling over Manhattan like the city itself was trying to bury the scandal beneath white silence. Inside the private hospital suite, the television mounted above the fireplace glowed softly while every person in the room watched the same live broadcast. Victoria Hale sat beneath studio lighting wearing pearl earrings and a cream designer dress chosen carefully to make her appear elegant and wounded at the same time. The anchor beside her leaned forward dramatically. Victoria, are you saying this pregnancy may have been planned to target the Blackwood family? Victoria lowered her eyes just enough to look sympathetic before answering. I am saying women have done desperate things for far less money. Evelyn felt the words hit like ice water. She sat motionless in the hospital bed, clutching the blanket tighter around herself while social media comments exploded across the bottom of the screen faster than anyone could read them. Team Victoria. Gold digger exposed. Per billionaire trapped by waitress. Damien stood near the television with both hands in his pockets, completely still except for the dangerous tension in his shoulders. Lucas muted the broadcast immediately after Victoria continued speaking. Damien has always been generous with vulnerable women. Unfortunately, some people confuse kindness with opportunity. Silence swallowed the room. Evelyn stared at the dark television screen after the sound disappeared. She knew this game. Wealthy people did not need to scream to destroy someone. They smiled politely while doing it. Turn it back on, Damien said quietly. Lucas frowned. She is doing this deliberately to upset Evelyn. I know. His voice sharpened slightly. Turn it back on. The sound returned. Victoria was now holding printed photographs for the cameras. Evelyn's stomach dropped instantly when she recognized them. Pictures of her leaving Harbor Street Diner. Carrying grocery bags. Walking home alone in oversized sweaters. One image showed her standing outside a discount baby store staring at cribs through the window because she could not afford to go inside that week. Someone had been following her for months. These photographs were taken over the course of several months. Victoria explained smoothly. If Miss Carter truly wanted privacy, why continue appearing near media districts in Manhattan? Evelyn stopped breathing for a second. The anchor nodded sympathetically. And what about the timeline? Victoria smiled softly. Damien and I were together long before this woman suddenly appeared tonight claiming to carry Blackwood heirs. Alexander Blackwood abruptly stood from his chair beside the fireplace. At 64 years old, he rarely showed visible anger, but the expression on his face now could have frozen oceans. Enough, he said sharply. Damien reached for his phone immediately. Ethan looked up from his laptop. What are you doing? Damien's eyes never left the television. Ending this. Evelyn looked toward him quickly. Damien, do not make this worse. He turned toward her instantly. Worse? His voice cracked for the first time all night. A woman is publicly humiliating the mother of my children while you sit here apologizing for existing. The room went silent. Mother of my children. Not alleged children. Not possible children. Mine. Evelyn felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes again. Damien noticed immediately and exhaled sharply, regret flashing across his face. I did not mean to raise my voice. You did not, she whispered softly. But he had raised something else instead. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope she spent 7 months trying to kill inside herself. Ethan suddenly looked up from his screen. Victoria's interview ratings are exploding online. Nearly 12 million live viewers already. Lucas muttered something under his breath while adjusting Evelyn's monitor again. Stress levels are rising. Another sharp tightening rolled through Evelyn's stomach. She winced instinctively. Damien moved beside the bed immediately. What is wrong? Nothing, she whispered too quickly. Lucas looked unconvinced. How long ago did the pressure start? Evelyn hesitated. Maybe 20 minutes. Lucas and Damien exchanged a look that instantly terrified the room. Those are contractions, Lucas said carefully. Evelyn felt panic climb into her chest. No. It is too early. Lucas checked the monitor again, his expression growing more serious by the second. Triplet pregnancies rarely make it to full term. Damien crouched beside the bed immediately. Look at me. Evelyn forced herself to meet his eyes. Breathe slowly. She tried. Another contraction tightened harder than before. Fear crashed through her instantly because suddenly everything else disappeared. The reporters. Victoria. The headlines. None of it mattered compared to the possibility of something happening to the babies. Lucas, Damien said quietly without taking his eyes off Evelyn. Tell me the truth. Lucas exhaled slowly. If labor starts tonight, the babies will likely need immediate neonatal support. Evelyn covered her stomach protectively, tears finally escaping despite her efforts to stay calm. Please, she whispered shakily. They are not ready yet. Damien reached for her hand without hesitation. Warm. Steady. Certain. Hey, he said softly. Look at me. She did. Nothing is happening to them tonight. Another contraction hit before she could answer. Machines beeped sharply around the room while nurses suddenly rushed inside. Lucas immediately stood and began giving instructions calmly. The peaceful hospital suite transformed into controlled chaos in seconds. Through it all, Damien never let go of Evelyn's hand. Then suddenly the television behind them flashed breaking news across the screen. Ethan turned toward it instantly, his face draining of color. Damien, he said carefully. Victoria just announced something else. Damien looked up sharply. Ethan swallowed once before speaking. She claimed she and you were secretly engaged the same week Evelyn became pregnant. The storm outside intensified just after 1 o'clock in the morning, snow slamming against the hospital windows hard enough to blur the Manhattan skyline into white shadows. Inside the maternity suite, the steady rhythm of medical monitors filled the air while nurses moved quickly around Evelyn Carter's bed. Another contraction tightened through her body, stronger this time, stealing her breath for several seconds. Lucas Blackwood checked the monitor again, his expression carefully controlled despite the tension in his eyes. The contractions are still irregular, he said calmly. That is good. But her stress hormones are too high. Damien stood beside the bed, refusing to move farther than arm's reach from Evelyn for even a second. His tuxedo shirt sleeves were rolled up now, his tie discarded hours ago somewhere in the hospital, but none of the exhaustion on his face mattered compared to the fear burning behind his eyes every time Evelyn winced. The television remained muted across the room, though Victoria Hale's face still flashed endlessly beside screaming headlines. Secret engagement exposed. Blackwood heirs scandal. Billionaire love triangle. Evelyn closed her eyes against the humiliation flooding her chest again. Turn it off, she whispered. Alexander immediately reached for the remote. Silence finally settled across the room without the glow of gossip channels poisoning the air. But the damage was already done. Evelyn knew millions of strangers were judging her tonight without knowing anything about her life. They did not know she spent months clipping coupons for prenatal vitamins. They did not know she skipped meals some nights because triplet pregnancies required more calories than she could afford. They only saw a waitress standing beside a billionaire. And people always assumed women like her were dangerous around men like Damien. Hey! Damien's voice softened beside her. Look at me! Evelyn slowly opened her eyes. Damien crouched carefully beside the hospital bed again, his hand still wrapped around hers with quiet determination. You are not alone in this anymore. The words hit harder than she expected because nobody had said anything like that to her in a very long time. Her father died when she was 19. Her mother spent years drifting between unstable relationships before disappearing to Arizona with a boyfriend who barely remembered Evelyn's birthday. Surviving alone became normal long before she got pregnant. Dependence felt unfamiliar. Unsafe. Another contraction rolled through her body. Damien tightened his grip immediately. Breathe. She tried. Lucas checked the monitor again while nurses adjusted intravenous lines nearby. The babies are still stable, he assured quietly. But she needs rest immediately. Ethan entered the room moments later carrying a tablet and a stack of legal folders under one arm. I have good news and bad news. Alexander sighed heavily from the fireplace chair. Start with the good. Victoria's interview backfired after she mentioned the engagement timeline. Ethan handed the tablet toward Damien. Social media had shifted dramatically within the last hour. Thousands of comments now questioned Victoria instead. Why announce an engagement during a pregnancy scandal? Why target a pregnant woman publicly? Several clips from the gala were already going viral online, especially the moment Damien rushed toward Evelyn before anyone else moved. One caption had nearly 8 million views already. He looked terrified for her. Evelyn blinked at the screen in disbelief. The internet loved tearing women apart, but sometimes it loved romance even more. Ethan continued carefully. Public sympathy is moving toward Evelyn. And the bad news? Alexander asked quietly. Ethan's expression darkened. Someone broke into Evelyn's apartment tonight. The room froze instantly. Evelyn sat upright despite the nurses protesting softly around her. What? Ethan nodded grimly. Security cameras in the building caught 2 unidentified men entering the apartment approximately 40 minutes ago. Fear crashed through Evelyn immediately. The nursery. Damien stood at once. Were they caught? No, Ethan answered. But the police arrived before anything was removed. Evelyn pressed both hands protectively against her stomach, panic spiraling through her chest now for completely different reasons. My baby's things are there. Damien looked at her carefully. Evelyn. Her voice shook harder now. I bought those clothes one piece at a time for months. Silence followed because suddenly the billionaires in the room understood something none of them considered before. While they fought media wars and corporate scandals tonight, Evelyn had quietly been building a life for 3 children entirely on her own. Damien grabbed his coat immediately. I am going there. Lucas frowned. The police already secured the building. I do not care. Damien's voice sharpened. Her home was targeted because of my life. Alexander stood slowly beside the fireplace. I will send additional security. But before anyone could move farther, Evelyn suddenly gasped softly. Another contraction hit harder than the others before it. Machines beeped faster beside the bed while nurses rushed closer instantly. Damien turned around so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. Evelyn? She grabbed his hand tightly. This time, genuine fear finally visible across her face. Something feels wrong. Lucas immediately checked the monitor, and for the first time all night the calm expression disappeared from his face completely. Call neonatal, he ordered sharply toward the nurses. Damien's blood drained from his face. Lucas. Lucas looked up slowly from the monitor. One of the baby's heart rates is dropping. The sound inside the hospital room changed instantly after Lucas Blackwood spoke those words. One of the baby's heart rates is dropping. Suddenly every machine seemed louder. Faster. Nurses moved with urgent precision, while snow battered the windows outside like the entire city was holding its breath with them. Evelyn Carter felt cold panic spread through her chest so quickly she could barely breathe. "No," she whispered shakily. "Please, no." Damien was beside her immediately, one hand gripping hers while the other brushed loose strands of hair away from her face with surprising gentleness. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." But Evelyn could not focus on anything except the frightened beeping echoing beside the hospital bed. Lucas studied the monitor carefully while another physician entered carrying additional equipment. "Baby B is showing distress," he explained calmly, though tension sharpened every word. "We need to stabilize her immediately." "Her?" Evelyn blinked through tears. "It is a girl?" Lucas looked up briefly and nodded once. "You are carrying 2 boys and 1 girl." Evelyn covered her mouth instantly as emotion crashed through her chest harder than the contractions ever had. She spent 7 months talking to those babies every night without even knowing who they were. Suddenly they felt even more real. 2 boys. 1 girl. Damien looked stunned beside her too. "A daughter," he whispered almost to himself. Another contraction tightened sharply through Evelyn's body. She gasped softly while Damien tightened his grip on her hand again. "Breathe," he reminded gently. Lucas adjusted the monitor, then looked toward Damien with controlled seriousness. "We need the room calm." Damien nodded immediately, but he never let go of Evelyn's hand. "Not once." "Alexander." Blackwood stood near the windows silently watching everything unfold, his powerful presence suddenly carrying none of its usual authority tonight. Because money could buy private hospitals, security teams, lawyers. But not certainty. Not safety. Not control over tiny heartbeats fighting to stay strong inside a frightened woman. Ethan stepped quietly toward the television and switched it off completely. The room no longer cared about Victoria Hale, or interviews or scandals. None of it mattered now. "Heart rate is improving slightly," Lucas announced after several endless minutes. Relief swept through the room so visibly that even the nurses exhaled softly. Evelyn closed her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. Damien noticed immediately and brushed one away carefully with his thumb before she could hide it. "You are doing so well," he whispered. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Not with admiration. Not like surviving itself was something worthy of tenderness. Evelyn looked at him through blurred vision. "I am scared." The confession came out smaller than she intended. Damien leaned closer instantly, his forehead almost touching hers now. "I know. What if something happens to them?" His expression changed immediately, sharp emotion flickering behind his eyes before he answered. "Nothing is happening to them." Evelyn shook her head weakly. "You cannot promise that." Damien swallowed hard once. Then quietly, honestly, he said the only thing powerful men rarely admitted aloud. "No. I cannot." Silence filled the room again. But this silence felt softer now. Human. Real. Damien squeezed her hand gently. "What I can promise is that you will never face any of this alone again." Evelyn stared at him because suddenly she believed him. And that terrified her almost more than the fear itself. A nurse entered moments later carrying a warm blanket fresh from the dryer and carefully wrapped it around Evelyn's shoulders. "Your babies like warmth," she said kindly. "Every time your temperature rises, their heart rates stabilize." Damien immediately looked toward the fireplace across the room. "Increase the room temperature." Lucas laughed quietly under his breath. "You cannot buy your way out of neonatal medicine." "Watch me try." For the first time all night, the room smiled. Even Evelyn let out a small exhausted laugh despite everything. Then suddenly another sound interrupted the quiet moment. A soft rhythmic flutter filled the monitor speakers beside the bed. 3 separate heartbeats. Strong again. Lucas checked the screen carefully before finally exhaling. "There she is." Evelyn covered her face with both hands as relief overwhelmed her completely. Damien closed his eyes briefly beside her, emotion finally cracking through the billionaire composure he fought to maintain all night. Alexander stepped closer slowly, staring at the monitor with visible wonder. 3 grandchildren, he murmured quietly. My God! The older billionaire looked toward Evelyn differently now. Not like a scandal. Not like a complication. Like family? Outside the hospital windows, snow continued falling over Manhattan in thick silver waves while the city obsessed over headlines and gossip and power. But inside the private maternity suite, none of those things mattered anymore. A frightened young woman sat surrounded by 4 billionaire men who would have traded every dollar they owned to hear those 3 tiny heartbeats continue. Evelyn looked down at her stomach and felt another soft kick beneath her hand. Then another. Then another. 3 little movements. Alive. Safe. Waiting. Damien rested his hand carefully beside hers again, and this time Evelyn did not pull away. She looked up at him quietly while the steady rhythm of their children filled the room between them. They already know your voice, she whispered. Damien's expression softened completely. I hope they know yours too. Evelyn smiled through exhausted tears. And for the first time in 7 long months, she stopped feeling like she was surviving alone.